Well, that didn't go as well as the first pitch. Part of what is going wrong there is we cannot, or the clients cannot really understand Draper's intention. He's in a particular situation in which they can full well understand that he's trying to communicate some kind of positive product attribute, but when he kind of cracks and then reveals his true biography and the true meaning of the product to him, it comes out to be a very kind of personal meaning, which is just not easy for them to connect with. So I picked that scene because it kind of shows a breakdown in this notion of intention. In the clients were not able to infer Draper's intention there. Although we as an audience can probably infer it pretty well because we can understand sort of where he's coming from in his biography. Another concept that I found very interesting in the chapter, in fact, I think it's essential, is Kenneth Burke's notion of identification. So Kenneth Burke is a pretty amazing kind of sociologist, thinker, rhetorician of the 1950s. And he talked about identification as just one of many concepts, but I think this is important. What does he say? It's identification is when people share a common substance or properties, citizenship, physical objects or attributes, occupations, friends, common enemies, activities, beliefs, and values, and they unite by sharing a common substance. In Burke's term, they become consubstantial, which means they have the same substance. Burke added, however, that people share properties only momentarily because each person is unique. So this is, of course, of interest to rhetorical theory because they want to understand how that connection happens, how someone can be persuaded by somebody else. And so here the idea is that momentarily we do identify with other people, whether it's through a shared experience or some kind of shared identity. And I think I often hear us talking about this in terms of it's relatable. So what you're saying is that if it's relatable, the audience has the ability to relate with it or to achieve some kind of identification. This is exactly what Burke is talking about. Why I think Burke is important, essential in fact, is that, as he points out, identification is temporary, it's fleeting. We don't all identify with the same thing all the time. So the kinds of assumptions that we make are very inaccurate when we sort of say, oh, well, he's, a 50-ish guy, he must identify with other 50-ish guys, or he must like these television shows which present experiences that he's had, so on and so forth, and momentarily, yes, Mad Men is set before I was born, but, maybe Don Draper dresses a little bit like my dad did or something like that. Momentarily, I can achieve some identification with the show. It's always through quite a personal experience, I'd say. We can also achieve identification through larger sort of demographic ideas. So, you must like that show because it's a show with women characters and you must identify with women. Well, I think any woman would say, yeah, sometimes, but other times I enjoy shows that have male central characters. Sometimes I see shows with women on them with whom I can't identify at all. So it's almost meaningless to say that something's relatable. Just about everything is relatable to somebody. But if we take the idea that that identification is a kind of a fleeting moment, which is very useful to a rhetorician, to somebody who's trying to persuade us of something, I think then we can just get in and analyze, okay, exactly why are we identifying in this case? How is that tenuous identification achieved? And how, for instance, did we lose it at some point? And what's the basis of identification given that long list? So I think that that's absolutely essential. All right, let's move on. And what's our next concept or idea? The idea of value. Okay, and so value is a concept that is very important in rhetorical analysis. This is the idea that you can be persuasive if you call out values that people in your audience also believe in. Those values that are widely shared in a culture could be, American values such as independence, equality, competition. These are all very central to American culture. We're not saying not to other cultures, but American culture is, these are strong values. And rhetorical critics are interested in seeing how those values play out in television shows. Perhaps they're even more interested than looking at that than they are at looking at the kinds of persuasive situations that I have presented to you so far to kind of exemplify rhetorical techniques. So let's think about value. How is it defined? A value is defined as an enduring belief that a specific mode of conduct or end state of existence is personally or socially preferable. Specifically, a value is a prescriptive belief that judges whether or not a means or an end is desirable or undesirable. So a value is one of those things that our culture upholds as good. So Aristotle would have talked about this possibly in terms of telos. In modern day, we talk about values. And for instance, if we see a character moving towards honesty, for instance, honesty in individual interactions is very important to us. Take a look at Don Draper. How does he do with honesty and such? So different values are quite interesting. And when you look at the show that you're working on, perhaps you'll find values expressed in the show. And this rhetorical theory is the place where you can go to kind of find the tool to talk about that in our course. Okay, so here is another scene from Mad Men, a little bit more complex than the one that we just saw because it's intercutting two different situations. What we'll see here is Joan, the office manager from Mad Men, is a very impressive character. She's beautiful, strong, independent, and she's also held down by patriarchy. It's just a good part of the critique that the show has of gender relations of the late 50s and early 60s are wrapped up with Joan. In this scene, we intercut between Joan basically pimping herself out to a client to get their business. She's sort of being half asked and half not asked. And Draper going in to do a Jaguar pitch. And you'll see the rhetorical connection being made, I think.